Hello everyone. In the early 90s, a college student would go out with friends to a local bar, only for him to disappear on his way home merely minutes from his dorm room. This is yet another case with little information and little evidence, leaving us all wondering what may have happened to him, and why hasn't he been found? Dean Mortensen was born to his mother Pat and his father, who was a mine worker, being the eldest of 4 children. He grew up in Grande Cache, Alberta, a coal mining town in west central Alberta, located in the northern part of the Rocky Mountains on Highway 40, approximately 145 kilometers northwest of Hinton and 435 kilometers west of Edmonton, with a population of around 3,200 residents. In 1991, earlier reports state that Dean was 18 years old. However, the Edmonton Police Service has him listed as 19 years old. That year, Dean began his first year at the University of Alberta, located in Edmonton, where he was studying general science. He seemed to be really getting comfortable at school, playing defense for the St. Joe's Rangers hockey team, and living at St. Joseph's College residence, a close-knit residence of approximately 63 young men. A poster of his favorite player, Steve Yzerman, captain of the Detroit Red Wings, hung on his wall. A friend of Dean's named Stephen Beeland, who also grew up with him in Grande Cache, and whose dorm room was right down the hall from Dean's, remembers him as being a super bright and very responsible young man, saying he was the only guy in the whole dorm who made his bed every day. At the end of his first semester, Dean would travel home to Grande Cache to spend the Christmas holidays with family. It was said to be a quiet Christmas and nothing was out of the ordinary. On January 6, 1992, he returned to the University of Alberta. Later that week, Dean would speak to his mother over the phone about his winter exam marks, which had turned out to be good. This would be the last time that Pat would speak to her son again. A few weeks into the second semester, on January 23rd, Dean withdrew $20 from his bank account and then went out with a group of guys from St. Joe's to a local campus bar called The Ship. This was a student pub located at the Lister Hall residence near the Jubilee Auditorium. Dean was said to not be much of a drinker. However, those with him that night say that he did drink a couple vodka slimes as he bobbed his head to Thunderstruck by AC/DC as the music blared from the speakers. It's also noted in newspaper sources that Dean more specifically drank 2 or 3 beers and a couple of shots of vodka over the course of several hours. Stephen saying, quote, "He was an old-fashioned kind of guy. Nowadays, people are rude and crude. He wasn't like that. He looked like a character out of a Norman Rockwell painting. He was lanky, shaggy-haired, and quiet. I never heard him swear once in my life." End quote. Before midnight, Stephen left the bar and headed back to the dorm, leaving Dean with 2 other male friends, according to Stephen. However, news reports would later say that only 1 male friend left with Dean. Dean, along with this male friend, would end up leaving the bar approximately at 12:30 a.m., which was now January 24th. It's important to note that it was said to be around negative 10 degrees Celsius that night. However, the boys' walk should have only been about 8 minutes down a major street, past the Butterdome Stadium, where they turned down a smaller street past a large parking garage on their right side and a university building on their left along with the Butterdome, and their dorm would have been at the end of that street on the right-hand side. Honestly, not a far remote or complicated walk even in those temperatures. However, as the 2 young men were halfway back to the dorm, at the intersection of 87th Avenue and 114th Street, the friend realized that they'd forgotten something at the pub. They said they would be right back, and they left Dean standing at that intersection for only a handful of minutes. Keep in mind, this intersection is less than 200 meters from their dorm at St. Joe's. Dean was no longer there. The next morning, Dean wouldn't show up to his first class, which was extremely out of character for him. Stephen recalls knocking on Dean's door early that morning as he walked to class. However, he didn't get a response, so he assumed that Dean must have slept in. His worry would only mount when Dean failed to show up to both his second and third classes that day as well. And by dinner that night, Dean still couldn't be found. Stephen, noticing Dean's absence, he frantically tried to convince the dorm room's prefect, which is an older student, like a monitor of the dorm room area, who just makes sure that everyone, is following the rules, staying in line, and if anyone has any questions, they go to this individual. Stephen would convince the person in charge to go and unlock Dean's dorm room door. But he was also not inside his room. Inside, the bed was still said to be made, and nothing was amiss or out of place. This led 5 students to begin searching the campus, hoping to find Dean, and eventually campus security would join in on the search. Over the next 3 days, dozens of friends walked every inch of the campus searching for clues. Police also canvassed St. Joseph's, asking some uncomfortable questions, such as did Dean have any enemies, was he depressed, or thinking about unaliving himself. On January 30th, police announced that they were canvassing cab drivers. They were hoping that a city cab had possibly been driving around the university that night and may have seen something of interest. 6 tactical force members, along with police dogs and their handlers, would search the area between 116th Street and Kinsman Fieldhouse for 4 hours. However, in the end, no evidence was found. The only real clue would come about a week or so after Dean disappeared, when a librarian would stumble across a blue St. Joe's Rangers baseball hat in the backyard of a residence at 108th Street and Saskatchewan Drive. I wasn't able to find that exact intersection. It doesn't seem that it's on modern maps anymore if it did exist. So I want to assume it was generally in this area, which would have only been a 16-minute walk from where Dean's friend left him waiting at the intersection. This was also the exact hat that Dean had been wearing the night he vanished. After this, on February 7th, police would call off the searches. However, on May 2nd, the Special Assistant Service Search and Rescue Association of Canada would conduct a ground search for Dean's body, but once again, nothing would be found. Staff Sergeant Steve Koenig of the City Police Criminal Investigation Section would tell the Edmonton Journal, quote, "From what we could see, this kid had it all. There was no reason for him to want to unalive himself, and no reason for anybody to abduct him. I think something snapped in him, whether it was caused by the alcohol, pressure from school, or whatever, and he just, being half drunk, decided that life ain't worth living, and took a walk." End quote. Pat, however, didn't believe that her son just ran away. She also didn't believe that alcohol had played a role in his disappearance. Dean was 6 foot 1 inches tall and only had drank 2 to 3 beers and a couple of vodka shots. His friends didn't notice anything unusual about him that night, and there was no indication that he was visibly intoxicated. He wasn't known to be a drinker. His bank accounts, which contained over $3,000, also remained untouched. In wake of Dean's disappearance, a number of changes would happen at the university. In 1994, the Students' Union Safe Walk program, which provides escorts for students walking at night, was developed out of concern for what happened to Dean Mortensen. It's also become traditional to hold a vigil for the male residents in memory of Dean, where the residents at St. Joe's take the Rangers hockey jerseys and hang them out their windows, and for SJC staff, students, and residents to wear blue ribbons on January 24th on Dean Mortensen Day. The number 55 was also retired, and Dean's Blue Ranger sweater hangs inside the residence walls. A scholarship would also be named after Dean that's awarded to students who are active in intramurals, have leadership skills, and contribute to a safer campus. In 2014, police would sweep the North Saskatchewan River in an attempt to solve local cold cases. After just 15 minutes of sweeping the river, remains ended up being found near the Capilano Bridge. Police saying, quote, "There have been files where bodies go down the river quite a ways all the way to Saskatchewan. That's why it is so important to do the search this time of year when water levels are low." End quote. Despite police finding remains in the river, I was unable to find if the body was ever identified and whose remains those were. However, they weren't Dean's or any other cases that I've covered around Edmonton. In my opinion, I don't think that it's very possible that Dean simply got lost and succumbed to the elements and his body just wasn't found. I don't think that's this kind of case. We speak quite often about cases where young men go missing in rural areas after being at parties and getting drunk. However, Dean was in the middle of Edmonton, a large city. He was in the middle of the university. He was directly in the area of the university grounds. As you can see from the photos, this isn't a remote area. This is the middle of a very dense cityscape. And I think it's very unlikely that if he did pass out somewhere, possibly from drinking or from a medical episode, or the elements got to him, that his body wouldn't have been found, and found quickly at that. This is a very busy area. There's tons of pedestrians, tons of students, tons of teachers. There's tons of people all around this area. And even if he stumbled into a park, you'd think decades later, he would have been found. The only true danger would have been if he fell into the North Saskatchewan River. As you could see, that would have been about a 23-minute walk if he had taken the route from where his hat was found nearby. But why would this teenager walk so far from his route when he was, again, less than 200 meters from his dorm? He knew the area. He'd been living there for a couple months at that point. This wasn't a complicated route. Even drunk, you think that someone would be able to follow that path. And from all accounts, he wasn't someone that got, absolutely blackout drunk. He went to the bar, had his fun, drank some drinks, but even from the information that friends had provided and people there that night, he wasn't absolutely blackout intoxicated. Now, on the other hand, someone who doesn't drink isn't going to have a tolerance, so possibly having 2 or 3 beers and maybe 2 shots of vodka might make someone quite drunk depending on how long of a period of time they drank those drinks. So maybe it could have affected him more than his friends would have been affected if they were more of drinkers. But would that cause him to walk 20 minutes out of the way when his dorm room was right there? Almost an eye shot of where he was left by that friend who went back to the bar. Unless we're not being told something, unless information is missing. I also don't think there's any evidence or information to say that Dean would have ran away or unalived himself possibly. Obviously, we don't know what's going on in someone's head at all times, but he had just spent the holidays with family. It was a quiet Christmas. Nothing was out of the ordinary. He also had $3,000 in his bank account. That's not a small sum of money, especially in the early 90s for a teenager. And he also seemed to be doing good in school. He seemed to be having fun there. He had friends. He had good grades. Everything seemed to be working out for this young man. He seemed to have quite a good life going for himself. There didn't seem to be any stressors. So why, after having a great night out at the bar with friends, would he just simply walk off and disappear? It also doesn't make sense to me that he possibly would have been kidnapped by maybe someone offering a ride, because again, he was less than 200 meters from his dorm room. Why, if someone offered him a ride, would he get in unless he was coerced into a vehicle, possibly at gunpoint or with a weapon of some sort? Or if someone pulled over that he knew and offered like, hey, we're going over to a house party or this or that. Maybe he felt comfortable and got in and wanted to continue his night. But then again, we have to remember, even though Dean was 18 or 19, he was quite a large boy. He was 6'1" tall. He was quite a large young man. So someone physically overpowering him doesn't seem as reasonable to me. Unless obviously there was a weapon involved or he was convinced by someone he knew. But would he go out and party longer considering he had classes in the morning? And again, he was known to be a very quiet, very responsible young man. Why, when he was heading home to go to sleep so he could be up for class in the morning, would he get into someone's vehicle or walk off somewhere? How could a good kid like this just completely disappear and vanish into thin air? How did his hat end up blocks away from where he was last seen? And how did all of this happen just within minutes of that friend he was with running back to the bar to grab his belongings and then coming back to that intersection? Unless it took longer than he says, but it seems like it was minutes later. He ran back, came back to the intersection, Dean was gone. But what do you all think? How could this young man just completely vanish into thin air and it be decades later and there still are no answers and there's still no evidence? There is probably so much more information here that we don't know. What happened to Dean? Could this simply be another Riley Strain case where this young man was way more intoxicated than anyone else thought? He wandered too far off his path, he fell in the river, and this is just a big accident? Or is there something more here? Did someone take Dean? Did something happen to Dean? Is there foul play involved? What do you think? Let me know down below and let me know if there's any more information that you know about this case. This case hardly has any coverage. It's something I'm very interested about. Again, there's not much information, so it's hard to cover cases like this, which may be why there's not much coverage on it. But let's have a conversation down below. And as always, if you have any information as to what happened to Dean, please contact the Edmonton Police Services. I'll have the information down below. And let's take one more good look at Dean, in case it sparks a memory of someone. Dean is described as a white male standing 6'1" tall and weighing around 165 pounds with brown hair. There is no description of his eye color. He was last seen wearing Nike runners, faded blue jeans, a dark blue St. Joe's Ranger hockey jersey, Grand Cache Bantam Elks hockey crest jacket, described to have white leather sleeves, gold leather shoulders, a white leather collar, and one sleeve had the word Dean and the other sleeve had the word defense. He also was wearing a St. Joe's Rangers crest dark blue baseball cap shown on the screen, which was later recovered. It has been decades and this family still has no answers and Dean still has not been found. So again, if you have any information, please contact the authorities. Please give this family closure. And as always, I hope you all stay safe out there, lock your windows and doors, and I hope to see you in the next video.